Storytime by Mike Writes Things. When Aizawa transferred into the hero course, he was the talk of the school. A Gen Ed kid had wiped the floor with everyone's asses like they were mops and won first place in the tournament. It was unheard of. Sure, Gen Ed kids had placed high in the rankings before, but first place? Everyone was staring at him like he was some exotic new animal at a zoo exhibit, eyes trained on his every movement, as if he was perhaps hiding the secret to ass-kickery up his baggy sleeves. The class watched with bated breath as he set his head down on his desk and promptly fell asleep, and began wondering if this was some ancient and powerful technique that would grant him strength if practiced. "God," the girls whispered, grouped together in their impenetrable band of strength and beauty. Why girls always formed these groups were a mystery to the male species, but they were terrifying, and this was further proven as they continued whispering. "He's kinda ugly." "Looks don't matter when it comes to the hero course," someone defended. "But yes, he is kinda bad looking." Hizashi was of the opinion that they were wrong. "What are they talking about?" he asked, as Aizawa woke up momentarily to glare at someone who had wandered too close into his personal space, eyes red with dryness. "He's hot." "Yeah," Tensei said, though this was half sarcastically, as Aizawa fell asleep on his desk again. "Real looker. Sexiest man alive." "Tensei, you don't get it. I mean, I thought he wasn't all that great up until he kicked my ass, and then it was like I had awakened the other 90% of my brain. I was a fool." "I'm pretty sure he hasn't washed his hair in months." Hizashi was very prone to falling in love with anybody, so long as they did one of three things: had the same music taste as him, drove a 1969 Maserati Ghibli, or kicked his ass. He wasn't sure about the first two things, but Aizawa had punched him repeatedly until kicking him out of bounds, which means he fits the last criteria. "Who cares if he hasn't?" Hizashi asked, resting his cheek on his fist and watching Aizawa, who sat right next to him. Aizawa didn't seem to notice his staring, nor did he notice Hizashi calling him hot. "I'll let him punch me again." "Why can't you be normal?" Tensei murmured flatly, "and fall in love with people who are nice like the rest of us." "You don't know if he's nice or not." "I don't, but you only liked him because he punched you." "Maybe so." Tensei dragged his hand down his face, appropriately done with his best friend. He could handle Hizashi falling in love with everyone who breathed his way, but this was a bit different. He was starting to think his friend was a masochist, and, of course, he supported him in every way, but this was a little bit too much. Class proceeded as normal. Or, well, as normal as it could be when over half of it was watching Aizawa, waiting for him to reveal some big secret. Maybe he'd start glowing, or maybe a god would manifest beside him and grant him powers, which would explain how he, a Gen Ed kid, had won the tournament. Nothing of the sort happened, of course. Around lunch, everyone stopped their staring to go eat, leaving him behind in the classroom. All except one. Hizashi leaned close to the other, smiling wide, for 5 minutes, which was how long it took Aizawa to notice him. "What do you want?" Aizawa asked, voice low and monotone. This was the first time Hizashi had actually heard him speak, and he was floored. His voice was lower than he'd been expecting. Aizawa was relatively short, and he'd been imagining him with a cuter, higher voice. This was fine, though. This was hot. Sexy. Nice. He pinched himself so he could stop thinking inappropriately. "I was just gonna ask if you wanted to eat lunch with my friend Tensei and I," Hizashi said, amazed at his own ability to form a coherent sentence when Aizawa was looking right at him. "No thanks." "Great," Hizashi said, not even comprehending the answer, and immediately gripping Aizawa's upper arm and attempting to drag him to the lunchroom. "I brought a bento and I'd love to share it with you." Aizawa struggled, and Hizashi's grip loosened only for him to be sent to the floor, an aching pain in his shoulder. It took him a minute to realize he'd been punched, and that Aizawa had returned to his peaceful slumber on top of his desk. This was fine. He just needed to ignore the throbbing pain for the next couple hours, as well as his wounded pride. Hizashi joined Tensei at lunch, inhaled half his bento, and began the conversation with, "He's a cactus." "Excuse me?" Tensei said, eyebrows raised. "He's prickly. He doesn't like being touched. Cactus." "Is that what took you so long to get here?" "He punched me, Tensei. It was amazing." Tensei just looked at him as if he'd grown a third arm, before going back to eating his lunch. So Hizashi sighed and did the same. The next day was a training day, and everyone was filled to the brim with anticipation. The boys in the locker room stared at Aizawa as he changed into his gym clothes, keeping an eye out for ancient tattoos anywhere on his person. They were severely disappointed. Aizawa wasn't even that muscular. He looked soft, and they noticed his face was round when he brushed his hair out of his eyes for a moment. He probably hadn't even hit puberty yet. What was his secret? Hizashi also stared at Aizawa, but for slightly different reasons. He was, of course, gauging Aizawa to see what kind of hidden strengths he could possess, but he was also checking out Aizawa's ass, which he got away with for about 6 seconds until Tensei noticed him and whacked him on the back of his head. Training began with a bang, quite literally, as someone exploded. They were going through their own mini-tournament, where the first match was randomly chosen, and the winner fought the next opponent, and so on. At first it was Kan for 3 rounds, then Akamatsu for another, and then Aizawa, who won 4. It was then Hizashi's turn to face off against Aizawa, so he stepped forward and braced himself, getting into a fighting stance. He knew what Aizawa's quirk was, which meant he couldn't rely on his quirk until Aizawa blinked. The match began almost instantly. Aizawa's quirk was active as he rushed forward, kicking his leg out to sweep Hizashi off his feet. Hizashi barely managed to dodge, but Aizawa changed the direction of his kick and struck Hizashi's inner thigh. Not quite close enough to his precious jewels, but close enough to make his life flash before his eyes. Filled with determination, Hizashi watched Aizawa's eyes close and took a deep breath, chest suddenly filled with that rumbling feeling his quirk gave him, and yelled loud enough for the ground to shake. Aizawa's hands shot up to cover his ears, and Hizashi shot forward at once. He was going to win and prove to Aizawa that he was actually a capable opponent, and not just that kid he managed to beat in 30 seconds during that sports festival. This was short-lived, however, because Aizawa's eyes widened when he noticed Hizashi getting closer and raised his knees in defense, getting Hizashi right in the gut. He fell to the ground, his breath knocked out of him, and he stared up at the sky, mouth agape. His arm laid across the boundary Sensei had laid in the sand, which meant he was out. Hizashi was hurt, but aroused. There was something extremely satisfying about getting winded like this. Aizawa appeared over him, grimacing, and offered a hand. Hizashi took it, and he was helped to his feet, wincing as his stomach protested in pain. "You did great!" Hizashi managed to wheeze out, and Aizawa met his eyes before quickly averting his gaze. "And you didn't suck," he said. "You did better than you did in the tournament." That was the third thing Aizawa had said to him since joining 1A, and it was so incredibly nice. He could feel the heat rising to his cheeks, and he was surprised he hadn't died yet. Melting into a large, shimmering bisexual puddle on the ground sounded extremely appealing. But before he could do so, he was dragged out of the ring and replaced by Tensei. 3 minutes later, Tensei rejoined him, looking as if Buddha himself had appeared before his very eyes and enlightened him. "You were right," Tensei said, eyes wide, mouth agape. I was a fool. Told ya, Hizashi said, patting him on the arm. No, Hizashi, this is huge. I think I'm gay. Oh, God, am I gay? Hizashi, please help me. Hizashi was not paying attention, and was instead watching Aizawa take down his next opponent, feeling incredibly satisfied when Tensei fell to his knees behind him and suffered through a gay awakening crisis. After Aizawa had said that one nice thing to him, Hizashi was suddenly extremely hell-bent on getting the other to be his friend, and made an extremely detailed and thought-out plan on a poster board, complete with glitter glue and sparkly stickers he borrowed from his mum. The next day, Hizashi put his plan into action. Please be my friend, Hizashi said to Aizawa, who was still being watched by the rest of the class. No, Aizawa said back. Okay. And with that, he turned away and walked to sit by Tensei, who was still recovering from his gay awakening crisis from the day previous, if the large book on his desk entitled Being Gay for Dummies was anything to go by. Hizashi put his plan into action every day for 3 weeks, a continuous cycle of, please be my friend, and no. But his mama didn't raise a quitter, so he didn't give up, and he had no plans of doing so. He did, however, cry twice into a tub of ice cream, but he will later say it was for an entirely different reason. I think you should give up, Tensei said, after his 22nd try, having successfully recovered from his gay awakening crisis. I don't think he wants to be friends. He does, Hizashi cried out. He actually talked to me. He doesn't talk to anyone. Well, Tensei said slowly, maybe you're the only one he talks to because you're one of the only ones who doesn't photograph everything he does? He gestured with his chopsticks to a group of their classmates, who were now documenting every move Aizawa made with their cameras to examine later, still looking for any sign of magical power. They had managed to compile an entire photo album after just 4 days. Hizashi ignored Tensei and kept at it for another week, until one fateful day. Please be my friend, Hizashi said. Fine, Aizawa said back. Hizashi broke down into tears, and when a very bewildered Aizawa hesitantly placed his hand on his back, he started crying harder. Tensei had buried his face into his hands, and his sighs could be heard from China. When Hizashi recovered, he invited Aizawa out to the arcade, who agreed, on the condition that he would get everyone to stop taking photos of him. Aizawa was a very fun person to hang out with, Hizashi said later, which Aizawa will vehemently disagree with, pointing out that all he did was stand back and criticize every move Hizashi made when playing games. Hizashi will counter that Aizawa became fun when Hizashi won him a stuffed cat. Aizawa will then hit Hizashi for even mentioning it. They went out to the arcade every day for 2 weeks, and Hizashi finally managed to convince him to come to lunch with he and Tensei. Aizawa and Tensei got along well, which was excellent. Why do you want to be friends with me? Aizawa asked, in the middle of lunch, and Tensei instantly scooted 3 seats away, knowing this was a conversation he wanted to not be a part of. Because I think you're hot and probably really nice, and I want to get to know you as a person and a fellow hero, but I'm unable to convey that through simple words, Hizashi wanted to say. Instead of saying that, he said, You beat me up. Okay, Aizawa said, looking somewhat satisfied with the answer, but not entirely. Tensei scooted 2 seats back towards them, but still stayed a safe distance away, just in case. Hizashi officially, 100% fell in love with Aizawa one August morning, when Aizawa invited him over to his house. Like, actually sent him a text saying, "Wanna come over?" It was glorious. Breathtaking. Hizashi cried again. 20 minutes after the text had been sent, he stood outside Aizawa's door, hand raised to knock it. But before he could, it was opened. "Oh," Aizawa said, sounding quite unimpressed, even though he had been the one to invite him. "You're here." Hizashi did not respond. He couldn't. Aizawa was wearing an overlong black t-shirt that went down to his thighs, and pink sweatpants, which were both extremely baggy, making him look smaller than he really was. He looked cute. Adorable. Hizashi was suddenly very aware of the height difference between them. He was invited inside and instantly got attacked by 3 cats. He fell to the ground in a dramatic heap as they climbed all over him, extending a hand to Aizawa, wishing for him to take it and save him from this assault. Aizawa instead just sat back to watch him die, and his hand fell to the ground. Traitor. After recovering from the cat attack... Cat attack? Hizashi sat on the couch with Aizawa, who was mumbling words Hizashi couldn't hear, but Hizashi pretended he could and nodded along with him. They watched 2 movies together, and every couple of minutes Hizashi would scoot closer to him on the couch, just a little bit. 8 tiny scooches later, and there was now less than 6 inches of space between them. Hizashi made eye contact with one of Aizawa's cats, the fattest one, who stared back at him judgmentally. He did not appreciate being judged by a cat, and stuck his tongue out at it. "Don't be mean to my cat," Aizawa spoke up. "Sorry." Hizashi apologized loudly, and somehow there was even less space between them. "Can I lay on you?" Aizawa asked, as the movie got a bit more dramatic, and Hizashi gulped. He imagined Aizawa's head resting on his thighs, hair splayed out. He imagined, taking a moment to run his fingers through the other's hair to feel how soft it was. He then imagined dying in that position, and guessed it wouldn't be that bad. "Yeah," Hizashi answered, and Aizawa turned and leaned against the armrest of the couch, legs resting on top of Hizashi's. Hizashi cried, but this time it was internally. When the movies were over and done, Hizashi was bored, so he managed to get one of the cats to approach him. He scratched between its ears and under its chin, feeling a little blessed when it started purring. He nearly jumped out of his skin when Aizawa leaned over to pet the cat too. "So, you like cats?" Hizashi asked quietly, glancing over at the other boy, and his heart nearly stopped. Aizawa was smiling, just a little bit, staring at his cat like it was the most precious thing in the world. Which it probably was. Hizashi felt like he was being blinded. He was so overcome by emotion from simply witnessing the smile that he almost missed Aizawa's answer of, "Yeah." They spent the better part of the evening petting cats and talking to one another, and Hizashi grew a little bit more relaxed. He no longer wanted to melt into a shimmering bisexual puddle onto the ground every 5 seconds. It had extended to every 5 minutes, which was a major improvement. "Hey, Aizawa," he started, about to ask if he wanted to go out and get something to eat. But Aizawa said something wonderful and sacred, something that should only be uttered by extremely blessed individuals who have been granted heavenly powers and status. "Shoda." "What?" "You can call me Shoda." Hizashi stared, wide-eyed at the other. Aizawa had raised the cat to his face, using it to shield himself from Hizashi. But even with that, Hizashi didn't miss the fact that there was a light blush on his cheeks and a pout on his lips. "Shoda," Hizashi repeated, and Shoda's blush grew. God, he was so cute. Hizashi was gonna die. At school the next day, Hizashi recounted the visit to Tensei, who listened despite having already heard it the day before when on the phone with Hizashi. He might have called him as soon as he got home, crying because he was so blessed, but Tensei had already been half asleep at the time and needed to be retold the story. I'm super in love with him, Hizashi finished the story with. And Tensei sighed. That's what you say every other day, Hizashi. I know, but I mean, for real this time. Like, it's not just me wanting to be absolutely wrecked by him anymore. Now, I want to actually, do things. Like, eating McDonald's with him at 3 in the morning, and go to the movies together. If you say so, Tensei said. But it fell on deaf ears. Hizashi was suddenly filled with glorious purpose, and he turned to see Shota half asleep on his desk. Ideas struck him from every which way, and his grin widened. I'm gonna hit that, Hizashi said confidently, ignoring Tensei's faked gags and mimed vomiting from behind him. Please don't, Tensei said, ever the rational person who actually thought things through. But Hizashi was already making his way over to where Shota was. He had a plan, and even though it had not been written on poster board with glitter glue, he was pretty sure it was foolproof, and he put it into action no matter how many times it failed. Hey, Shota! Hizashi said loudly, and Shota blinked up at him tiredly. What? He said flatly, and Hizashi sat at the edge of Shota's desk. Please go out with me. Okay. Hizashi blinked, taken aback. I said, please go out with me. And I said, okay. Like, on a date, where we make out in the back of my car? Okay. Yeah. Sure. Hizashi dropped to his knees, suddenly brimming with confidence. The air seemed to be charged with static, and he took Shota's hands in his own. Please marry me. Okay, Shota said, averting his gaze. But there's something you need to know about me. Anything. I'm actually a god. Hizashi blinked, and behind him, the windows shattered from an explosion. The CIA had arrived all the way from America. Tensei jumped in front to shield him with his own body, sacrificing his own life for him. Shota stood up, sweeping Hizashi off his feet and into his arms, a feat which should almost be impossible, considering their 8-inch height difference, but he did it anyway. Let's go, Shota said, and they jumped out of another window and— Mike-sensei. Hizashi blinked, a bit surprised that he was being interrupted, and irritably asked, What? That doesn't sound like a real story, Jiro said, and the rest of the class nodded. I mean, it was sort of believable all up until the CIA part. No way that really happened. I can confirm my brother is not dead, Ida added. You kids don't know what you're talking about, Hizashi cried out, flailing his arms. I really am married to Eraser. Maybe so, but no way it happened like that. Guys, shh! Ashido yelped. I want to hear the rest of the story. You will not, a new voice joined, and everyone looked over to see Shota standing in the doorway. He directed a glare to Hizashi, who shrunk a little under his gaze. Class ended 5 minutes ago, Mike. Sorry, Eraser, Hizashi apologized, smiling. I was just telling everyone the wonderful story of how I proposed, and he accidentally dropped the ring in front of me at McDonald's after work, Shota said, making his way to his desk, and tried saying he was holding it for someone else. Class dismissed. Hizashi groaned as everyone stood up, ready to leave. Come on, that was a great storytelling opportunity. I don't recall there being CIA agents. Hizashi pouted, but didn't say anything as the students filed out. When the last stragglers disappeared, He sidled up to his husband, wrapping his arms around his waist, and said, "You love me." "Do I?" "I mean, you said yes when I proposed." "No," Shota said, smiling. It was a small smile, but it was definitely there. "I said yes when you dropped the ring and tried asking. Let's say that ring was for me. What would I say?" "That still counts." Hizashi had gotten closer, and they stared at one another for a moment, before Hizashi leaned forward and kissed the other. They stayed that way for 3 wonderful seconds until— "Sorry, I forgot my— Oh, God, I'm so sorry." They broke apart to see Kirishima standing there, gaze flitting everywhere that wasn't his teacher's. Shota sighed and said nothing as he walked out of the classroom, leaving Hizashi behind to deal with the mess. "I'm sorry," Kirishima apologized again, and Hizashi waved off his apology. "It's fine, listener. Learn to knock." Kirishima nodded, before pausing and asking slowly, "Mike-sensei, how did you propose? I mean, for future reference and all, like, if I ever wanted to propose to someone." Hizashi blinked in surprise, before smiling and crouching down a bit so he was eye level with the student. "Well, for starters, don't drop the ring in front of them at McDonald's.